There we go. Thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime. I'm Emma Hoddinott. I'm the local government officer at the Co-op Party, and hopefully you're here for our cooperation live call on time to invest in the North. And we've got two great speakers today in Jamie Driscoll and Kim McGuinness, and I'll introduce them in a bit, but I just need to go through some of the sort of technical stuff, if that's all right with you. The first thing to let you know is that this call is being recorded, so our members can see it afterwards. It's available on our YouTube channel. If you don't want to be seen, if you don't want to appear on that, then turn your video off. If you are quite happy to be seen, and I can see some lovely members there, then keep it on. It's always good to see you. But if you don't want to appear on that, then just flip your video off, if that's all right. You'll also notice you've been muted as well, and that's just to enable us to hear from our speakers, and there's no sort of dogs or doorbells interrupting them during their presentations. And what we'll do, we'll hear a little bit from our two great speakers, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A session, and you will have a chance to come in if that's all right. What you can do, if you do want to come in with a question or anything, you can use the raise hand function, which is at the bottom of the participants bit. You can post your question in the chat box as well, or you can email it to events@party.coop as well. So there's plenty of opportunities to take part, respond to what you're hearing, and that's my phone going. I do apologise. The trouble is I can't mute myself. And yeah, an opportunity to take part, and we're going to be here for till about 2:30 today. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker, and it's really good to see him. It feels like it's been ages with lockdown, but it's Jamie Driscoll, who's the Labour and Cooperative Mayor for the North of Tyne. Jamie has recently launched a 5-point economic plan about building back following COVID, and I'm really interested to hear in particular about his good work pledge that is launched for employers as well. I think that's a really good example that many of us across the country can hear about. And yeah, so we're going to hear from Jamie, and obviously we've got a focus on the North today, and I guess a little bit about maybe some of the imbalance we're seeing under this government. Surely not, but over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Emma. Well, for some of you, I don't know where everybody's from, but I'll assume that not everybody lives in the glorious Northeast. So I've been North of Tyne Mayor for around about 18 months now. May last year, I came in, brand new organisation, had to set it up more or less from scratch. So day one, there were more TV camera crew there than I had permanent staff. So we've built that up, and it's got to say, it's not been the easiest 18 months to come into a new political organisation with Brexit shenanigans, general elections, and then just as I'm getting my permanent team set up and ready to run, we then hit with the biggest pandemic that any of us have lived through and the biggest recession ever, as far as I can tell, because we're not out of it yet. And so I was lobbying government very early in the pandemic. In fact, actually, the first thing we did, as soon as it happened, we allocated £5 million from our reserves to help businesses, because we knew lots of people were going to be falling through the gaps. In particular, many of you will know, certainly, you know, that not everybody just a cooperative, but small business owners, owner-managers in general, will know that many people, for example, those who work from home or those who worked in shared workspaces, fell through the gaps of the government provision. Often, if you were just paying rent, especially on easy in, easy out terms to a lot of these places, your business had no support. So we channeled a significant part of that £5 million to keeping that, safeguarded lots of jobs. We put money into tackling digital exclusion, because a lot of kids and a lot of people applying for jobs without internet access in any meaningful sense. Kids being sent home from school, finding out that if you got a laptop in the house, and then they get home and they find mum or dad's working on it, and so they can't do the schoolwork. So providing people with the real practical support, and we had that up and rolled out within weeks, way faster than central government. but lobbied government says, look, we need an economic plan here. And so they wrote to me and wrote to the other mayors, the metro mayors, and said, please, lead, come up with an economic plan for your area. Because nobody's looking for where the future jobs are coming from. One of the things that's obvious about COVID is it has not just caused damage, but it's also caused a massive acceleration of economic change that was happening anyway. The fact that we're all on this call, despite the fact that, you know, everybody in this call is progressive, it just wouldn't have happened this time last year, as I'm sure Emma would have said. We would have been physically in a room and we would have got trains and cars and whatever it was to get places. And so a lot of people are now shopping online. We were all shopping online a bit, but that has accelerated. So there is an economic change. So where are the new jobs coming from? Well, we know we can do this. We know it works already in the north of Tyne. And, you know, bearing in mind, anyone who's ever bought a house knows you buy the house, do the deal, and then you move in the next day. Yeah, it's that simple. How we know that's not true is that any program you set up, it takes time to implement. You've got due diligence, you've got scrutiny, you've got call-ins. Anyone who's a councillor knows that. You've got to publish it, and then people have a chance to say, oh, hang on, I object, all the rest of it. You've got to do that, and then contracting and everything. So to do anything within 18 months is remarkable. But we've already safeguarded 1,782 jobs. We're on target to create 2,732 jobs, loads more in the pipeline. Given that the target the government set me in the 5 years of my term was 1,600, I'm already increased that by more than 1,000. So we can demonstrate that we know what we're doing. And it sort of belies this myth that socialists are no good at running an economy. We're actually very, very good at it. But then our recovery plan was, well, where are the new jobs coming from if there is this economic shift? And at the heart of it is our Green New Deal. Now, we would already work this up and we're putting some of it in place before COVID struck. Offshore wind is a major thing in the Northeast. Highly skilled jobs, well-paid jobs, and jobs that aren't just temporary or 0 hours. We can create 9,000 jobs. A lot of the challenge is that you hear lots of announcements about Britain's going to develop offshore technology, things like that. The work at the moment is going to China and the Gulf states and places like that because the government is not enforcing what is called the local content regulations. So we've done some work to find out a way that can do that without a change in the law, using economic impact assessments to make sure that we get 9,000 really good quality jobs here. And, you know, when you talk about jobs as engineers, as welders, as people doing this sort of stuff, they create a very large multiplier effect because it brings a lot of money into the local economy. So there's those, and substrate minerals and a supply industry for electric batteries, all of that's going as well. Decommissioning the oil rigs and things in the North Sea. Loads of jobs there. We've put 2 million quid into a just transition so that the people who are coming from the high polluting fossil fuel industries aren't put on the scrap heap the way the Northeast saw with the miners' strike, and we also lost our steelworks, our wagon works, so many other industries. This is to enable people so that they can get the skills they need to move into these new jobs. And that's how we tackle it. That's what a just transition is. And also in this plan is work on housing, creating 5,000 new homes, retrofitting 50,000 homes. All told, the plan will create 31,000 jobs, create 14,000 training opportunities, and that's in the north of Tyne alone, because only half of the Northeast is in the mayoral combined authority, but we're working to do that. And that's just the start. That requires government to start it off, to sign it off, but we're doing a lot of this work already. But part of it is I've pitched for a regional wealth fund, the power to borrow at base rate so that we can invest with patient capital in small local businesses so that they're growing and creating jobs and creating the multipliers and the supply chains. But crucially, the money doesn't just get chucked at businesses and says, you know, bye, we've lost that, go back, government, can I have some more, please? I've spent that. It's recycled because we continue to get the benefits of that. It's a win-win. Nobody loses. Central government wins, we win, our local economy win, the people who work in these industries win. We have with a project which isn't quite signed off yet, but it will be, about developing our cooperative sector with workers specifically to help people, both those who are transitioning from industries where someone's retired or the owner manager's had enough, and these often get sold off or assets stripped. So shifting them into workaround industries, as well as people setting up their own. And one of the things that we did in the early stages in this work is we went around, I say we, it's inevitably my officers, I just take the credit. spoke to all the people who used to do this work, and we've found there's been such a loss of knowledge infrastructure from these support agencies as a result of the economic policies of the last 30, 40 years, that reversing that is one of the key priorities. So that's why we're getting people in to do it, hiring professionals on a permanent basis, embedded within our economics teams. So they're not, down the bottom of the garden shed, oh, there's something for the co-ops. This is actually a core part of our strategy. Working with Co-ops UK, also working with a part of a bigger project with others, the progressive think tanks, NEF, Open Society Foundation, people like that, to make sure that we have this as a foundation. Now, one example of this is our teachers' cooperative supply agency. When we talk of 0 hours workers, we tend not to think of highly skilled professionals like teachers, but there's loads of teachers as 0 hours contract workers, supply agents. And typically, and perhaps not on average, but typically a school is charged 250 quid a day for a supply teacher, and the teacher might be getting between 68 and 98 quid a day. Now, if we set up a supply agency that's owned, a multi-stakeholder co-op, by some of the schools involved, crucially by the trade unions and the members, and we funded the business planning for this. We've done the due diligence. It's now working up. The unions are getting a lot of people really keen to make this work. So that's what cooperatives are essential. You can't tell people, you set up a cooperative. It requires that sort of grassroots up enthusiasm. Working with the unions, we've found that. And it will ensure that these people get a pension and proper pay. Crucially, continual professional development, which supply workers always miss out on, which means a better education for the kids because the teachers are more up to date, and it means better value and certainly better continuity for the schools. So what's not to like that? So that's one of the examples of what we're doing with our cooperatives program, and a massive one that'd be a massive game changer, but it's also a massive piece of work, and COVID has inevitably taken a lot of the capacity out of my team, is for a people's cooperative bank based in the Northeast. But that has to go through a lot of regulatory and licensing processes, so that takes a long time, but we're still on it. And we've had the due diligence work done on that, and it says, yeah, it's highly profitable. The model works. It will hit profit roughly about 4 years, 7 months in, and that's just a piece of work that needs to happen. But the amount of regulation you've got to go through, quite sensibly, because we all remember the banking crash, but that's ongoing. So one of the other things we've got to do is, I'm kind of doing all of this with one hand behind my back, because unlike most of the mayoral combined authorities, we only cover half of our functional economic area. So it's just the north of Tyne. That's analogous to saying that Sadiq would be just the mayor of North London and South London is just all the local authorities on their own. For historical reasons, but working with everybody, we're pulling that back together. We've got government to accept that we will get our share of the transport money going to, because I don't have transport powers, because the light rail system, the metro, is half in the north of Tyne, half in the south. So pulling that together has been a major priority. We're now at the point where we're negotiating the starting bid to talk to government, so getting an extra more than 500 million quid for the transport and a load more powers to come with it. And with that, we're looking for the vision of a net zero, zero carbon, zero poverty devolution deal to eradicate it, because it shouldn't happen. You can never eradicate relative poverty, because by definition it's relative. What you can do is eradicate absolute poverty. No one should be going to a food bank. No one should be suffering school uniform poverty. And that's just a matter of political will. We saw early in this crisis, homelessness was solved like that when government said, right, everybody in, there's the money. So we can do it, and that's what we want the basis of this to be, because that's how we level up. So when it comes to leveling up, a key part of this is about better jobs. So we are creating jobs, and we've created loads of jobs, and there's people already from some of the firms I've brought here, as well as the other work we're doing locally, now employed as a result of the work we've done, despite everything. So it's actually quite remarkable when I think about it. But the Good Work Pledge is something that we're rolling out. So it will form the basis of our procurement, and then go through the procurement of our local authorities, and then our other public sector departments. And we're getting some large private sector employers to come into this as well, which is great. So we've already got a load of early adopters signed up. This requires, so there's 5 basic pillars, but roughly proper remuneration. so people get paid the real living wage as a minimum. Proper stability at work, so an end to all forms of exploitative contracts. Make sure there's in-work progression so that people actually can get skilled up and develop themselves. So flexible labour market, yeah, everyone sees the benefits. Flexible labour market at the expense of living conditions, absolutely not. So that's part of it. The proper engagement with workers. So unlike most these things, ours is actually, and it's always good to have a bit of rivalry with my fellow Metro mayors, but ours has a real gold standard in it, that to qualify for that pillar of the accreditation, you need a trade union recognition agreement in place. Not just, oh yes, you know, we recognise trade unions are and we don't shout at people if they join one, but actually a proper trade union recognition agreement in, which is bringing in collective bargaining, which is bringing in the strength of the labour movement. And because all the evidence says that unionised workplaces are more productive, more efficient, have fewer labour disputes, and it works for everybody. And it's largely just prejudice that they're not there. So this is helping overcome that. And naturally enough, obviously, the trade unions are massively supportive about this. The final pillar is actually about social responsibility. So yes, it includes things like environmental sustainability. It also includes things like paying small businesses on time. Now, our local authorities around here are brilliant at this. It's often large companies who are terrible. And when I meet with small business owners, the number one thing that comes up time and time again is that they don't pay me. You know, it's 30-day terms, 90 days, still haven't paid me. And then I ask, and then they query the invoice. And then I think, oh, shall I push it or shall I just accept a lower payment? And you cannot run a business on that basis. You know, the Tories are supposed to be the party of business. They're not. They're bloody useless at it. And it's socialists and cooperators who are good at this because they get it. We're the wealth generators rather than the wealth extractors. So that's a whistle-stop tour for what we've done. It's about creating an economy based on justice, because that is what sustainability is. Yes, environmental sustainability. We declared a climate emergency day one. We are going to be net zero ourselves very, very soon. It's about economic sustainability so that people can have a job, so that people can pay the bills. And with that comes the social sustainability, which I'm sure Kim's going to talk about from a crime perspective. But social sustainability, we all know, is that we need these downstream savings. So we're not as big as London. We're not as fashionable as Manchester, but we're doing a cracking job.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And we're not competitive in the north at all, are we? I want to introduce, and thank you very much for mentioning Kim McGuinness, who is our Northumbria Police and Crime Commissioner. Really pleased she can join us. If you don't know, there are really important Police and Crime Commissioner elections in England and Wales next year in 2021. And Kim is our Labour and Co-op candidate, and we need to make sure we get her back re-elected, but also lots of commissioners across the country as well. Because as you say, that social responsibility is just as important. And I'm really keen to hear from Kim. We're talking about, is it time to invest in the north? I know our police services were decimated under the Tory government, but we were promised more police officers. So it'd be interesting to hear whether we're actually seeing that investment. So over to you, Kim.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for that, and thank you for that lovely introduction. There are elections in May. Hopefully A, they will go ahead, and B, I will be able to see all of you on the doorstep. That would be amazing. Imagine if we could come together and actually do some campaigning together in the same place. It feels like a long way off at the moment, but yeah, thank you for having me. So I think that's a really good point about kind of police and crime commissioner elections and why it's important to have Labour and cooperative candidates in those spaces and getting elected. I've obviously not been in the role an awful long time. I was elected on a by-election in July 2018 when Vera Baird went off to be the National Victims Commissioner because of all the great work that she had done, particularly around domestic abuse and sexual violence. And she's obviously doing a great job at that. And none of her agenda is something that I would give up at all. You know, we are very committed to continuing with that. But what I stood on a platform of, which I know is very, very important to co-op in terms of getting this across as in police and crime commissioner elections, is taking a joined up and public health approach to crime and to crime prevention. And it's something I'm incredibly passionate about, and it's something that we're working incredibly hard despite the challenging circumstances to deliver. So my plan today is to talk to you a little bit about that, about some of the other things. We can talk about police officer numbers, but I also want to talk about the impact of the pandemic and how, you know, that investment in the North is so important to us from a recovery point of view, not just economically, but socially, and particularly on keeping our communities safe. So for anyone who doesn't know, taking a public health approach means that we treat violence and crime like it is a disease. And you know, in these times when we're always talking about viral transmission of COVID, it's an easy analogy to follow. We think about it in terms of there being symptoms such as deprivation and adverse childhood experiences, and other social issues, poverty, and we try and remove and treat those symptoms to stop the spread of the virus. We also treat it in terms of the fact that people who have contact with other people who are violent or who are in lives of criminality and stuck in these loops catch it, they're contagious, they catch it from one another. And also, and I suppose it takes the analogy a little bit too far, there are a huge amount of people who are very interested in other people getting into these lifestyles, which is a different issue, but still very connected. Since 2010, as has already been made very clear, we have suffered from the impact of austerity. We've suffered in terms of numbers of police officers, but actually the thing that's important when we look at this agenda, and I think it's so important for all of us and what we believe in, is that we've also suffered in terms of cuts to local services, cuts to local authorities, cuts to charities and the third sector, cuts to youth services, cuts to family services, and things like Sure Start. And so, to me, the way that we tackle some of these issues and prevent crime and take this public health approach is to try and push investment back into those spaces. So we need to have better youth services that are community-led, that are done with the community rather than to the community. We need to be able to make good quality interventions for families who need a little bit of support in early years, for new mums and new dads and new families. We need to make sure that everybody gets the best start in life. And we need to make sure that there are routes out of crime if you get into it. There are routes out of addiction if you get into it. There are routes out of poverty, including jobs and employment opportunities. And so I established with government money a violence reduction unit. I don't love the terminology. I think it's very Home Office. But that is what the money is for. We lobbied for that and we got that £1.6 million a year for 2 years, and that's exactly what we've done with it. We've worked with the local authorities, with public services, with charities, with organisations right across the region to channel in money back to those vital services that prevent crime. And we have seen results. We've seen a 17% reduction in violent crime in the region. We've seen reductions in burglary and certain types of antisocial behaviour. And I'm not going to say that I think that is entirely because of that money and that investment and that concentration, but I think it's very hard to say that we spent 1.6 million on those services plus an extra 2 million on frontline policing tackling these issues, and it didn't have a positive impact. And so that's been the huge focus for me since I was elected, and it's the huge focus going forward, because I firmly believe that we can't arrest our way out of some of these problems that have been created by years of poverty and inequality. We have to treat our way out of them, and we have to change things for people for the better in order to prevent these things. So I think that's kind of the big thing. And I'm passionate about it and can talk about it for days, but you know that the links between that and what Jamie talks about with a strong positive local economy and with new green jobs are incredibly important to the futures of the young people, and it is predominantly young people who we're trying to influence through that process. You touched on officer numbers, really important, and yeah, we were hugely hit by officer numbers in Northumbria. Over 1,100 police officers short since 2010. It's a huge number across our area. We've got a really culturally and landscape diverse. I don't know what the right terminology is, but the area is incredibly diverse. We've got vast swathes of countryside up in Northumberland and some of the rural areas south of the Tyne. We've got towns in Gateshead and North Tyneside and South Tyneside, North and South Shields. We've got Ashington, Berwick, Blythe, etc. We've got cities with Sunderland and Newcastle. We've got coastline. We've got tourist spots. We've got 2 major universities. And that's kind of only just scratching the surface. The Northumbria area is incredibly diverse, and you take 1,100 police officers out of that, and it has a massive impact, not just on crime, but on community confidence and on their ability to respond to their communities. So government promised to increase policing in the UK by 20,000. Our share of that wasn't awfully impressive. We're recruiting above and beyond that target quicker than we're expected to, and so far I think we're nearly at 200 over the number that we were expected to recruit, and I entirely intend to continue with that. However, and this is not a caveat that we're in control of locally, although we'll continue to lobby for it. What I'm really concerned about with this agenda and with many others is that government will take us in this recession that we are now in into another phase of austerity, which will see us forced to continue to uplift police officer numbers, but at risk of having to reduce police staff numbers. And that is a massive risk to the police service, because if all you end up with is those officers doing back office jobs, then it defeats the whole object of the process in the first place. And so we're lobbying very hard for that at the moment. And I'm really proud of the performance in Northumbria. I think the force have done a cracking job at adapting to being able to recruit at such a difficult time. But I also think that we are in danger of running into a situation where all of that hard work could be undone. So with that, I've touched a bit on COVID. That recession is in part as a result of the virus and the way that the government have managed the virus. And we are now in recession. And my concerns about the police budget I am concerned about the police budget, but again, that takes us back to that loop of thinking about all of the other public services who might suffer, how it affects our economy, how it affects our jobs. And really, when I get down to the nitty gritty bit, the people who I am most worried about are the people on the extremities of our society. So the very young people who for months and months and months now have had all of their support systems taken away. For a long time they didn't go to school. Now they're back in school, and we're seeing the education attainment gap widening between the rich and the poor. I'm worried about the fact that the government has talked almost exclusively about education as being the key. Education absolutely is the key, but for so many of our young people, it's things outside of education that keep them going, trusted adults, youth services, football, sport, whatever it may be, and all of that's been stripped away. And I worry that those young people will come out of education into a space where there are not enough jobs for them. And the concern there is that when we find that happening, we see crime rising, and we get back into that vicious circle of deprivation impacting crime. And so myself and Jamie are working with the local authority leaders across the region so that we can join up this picture of social and economic recovery to make sure that we're addressing the whole picture, I suppose, in that public health way, but taking it way beyond just being about crime. So I'll stop there because I know you want to get to questions, but that's a whistle stop of some of what we've been doing. I didn't touch on the fact that we also dished out huge amounts of funding in COVID response to our charities and third sector, which I know was really needed, and there'll be more of that to come. But a little bit of what we've been up to and what I think it is that's staring sort of down the barrel at us at the moment.
That's brilliant, thank you, and so good to hear the complementary approaches, and I guess your vision for the North East in terms of what you're doing. We do have some questions and some comments as well. The first comment was from Peter saying thanks to Jamie for flagging up about the teachers co-op. So you've got some fans about that as well. The first one, I'm going to bring in Billy Smith, if that's all right, just because I don't quite understand your question, but it's about manufacturing. So it might be easier for you to explain I guess your thoughts and your question about this.
Okay. Hi. Thanks for what the previous speakers were saying. My apologies for the way I communicate. I'm still recovering from brain surgery from about 6-7 years back.
Should I remind you? Would that be helpful?
Oh, sorry. One of the side effects I have. One of the major problems that I have is I have severe ADHD.
Right.
Please accept explicit permissions that if I do go too far off on a tangent, to just grab the steering wheel of the conversation and drag me back on track. I usually find it's easier to say it explicitly. What was it? Right, from the point of view
around digital manufacturing,
right.
and I guess
the way that I look at it is that from a technological standpoint, there are large numbers of solutions that are technically work from a technological standpoint, but aren't profitable for companies to build. Now, we have had the technical capabilities to feed, clothe, house, educate, provide medical and social care for everyone on the planet since the 1850s. It just hasn't been done. Now, the way that I look at it is that, I'm an engineer, and my approach when I come across a situation like this is to be like, okay, yeah, there's a problem. What can I build that will fix it? And now, from the way that I look at the way that I look at the industry, the price point of digital manufacturing and digital fabrication has actually dropped through the floor over the last 20 years. The initial fab lab that was built by MIT, and originally cost around 250 grand. About 10 years later, the same spec of fab lab was built by 4 artists in Holland for 5 grand, 5,000 euros. Now, okay, you can see the 3D printer in the background, creating plastic toys for techies is fair enough. What I'm trying to do is integrate this with woodworking, metalworking, and the actual sort of larger scale manufacturing, so that you can produce the infrastructure that's necessary for us all to survive. And by saying all, I don't mean you, me, and the people that are in the UK. I mean everyone on the planet. We're currently facing around movement of around what's it, 1.2, the projection was between 1.2 and 1.5 billion climate refugees. These are all people that can actually be housed, that can actually be fed, that can actually be that can actually be provided for a base level of we have the capabilities to manufacture this stuff. And
I guess your question is, Billy, how do we support that? Can I put that to Jamie, because I'm conscious yes. I've got some other questions as well. So Jamie, if you wouldn't mind touching upon that. A proud industrial passed up in north of Tyne, but this is a question about what next.
Well, thanks, Billy. Yeah, I too am an engineer professionally. Worked May the King, breathing apparatus, organising production in the electronics industry, and then as a software developer, looking at that before becoming a politician. And the skills, actually, many of them are transferable, because what you're talking about there is the organisation of resources, because that's what engineering is. Yes, there's technical aspects to it. And that has been the problem, is that we have an economy which is essentially extractive. The capitalism, it's a bit of a myth that capitalism led to prosperity or trade. We've had trade long before capitalism. We'll have trade way into the future as long as the human race is around. The point of capitalism is you make profits for the sake of making profits. The point of engineering is you do stuff because it works. And that's the part that we need. And the ethos of the Co-operative Party is the value in your own labour, in sustainability, self-sustainability, all of these aspects to it. And you mentioned, climate refugees. Well, number one thing is obviously is to minimise emissions as soon as possible, as well as you're quite right. The damage is done in a large part of the world already, and about the mitigation and the adaptation. So what do we do? Well, we need an economy that prioritises the generation of wealth rather than creating asset values. So building more buy-to-rot tower blocks along the Thames because nobody lives in them, but the value goes up, or seeing share prices go up because companies are doing share buybacks rather than investing, exactly as you say, in manufacturing or research and development. That's the sort of stuff that needs to happen. All of that requires us basically to get Keir Starmer through the door at number 10, Ed Miliband to introduce the Green New Deal, and everything that the rest of the team have got to do. So what my role in that is A, showing it works, so they've got the ammunition in the next election, and B, make sure the groundwork's done here in the Northeast. And that is about the development of it. Some of the stuff we're doing around subsea minerals is revolutionary. We know that there's going to be a massive demand for electric batteries. We know there's a constraint on the materials for these because they come out of Central Africa, which is a war-torn country, where kids are forced at gunpoint to mine. But there is 10 times more of this stuff lying around on the bottom of the sea, and all someone's got to do is pick it up. The problem is it's 3 miles down, and that's very deep, and it's very expensive to get it. So we've got North of Tyne engineering companies developing solutions for this that we're working with, and that in summary, that's the general approach. So I'm not sure I've got a specific answer to your question, but I hope that's helpful.
No, a useful discussion. We've got actually sort of linking to that a couple of questions about the Green New Deal, and I'm interested in both your perspectives actually. All the authorities in the Northeast have a part to play in this, and from Steve Handsome and actually Jeff Beacon, very similar questions about it not being enough, basically, the Green New Deal. So from Steve, many agree that a Green New Deal is a way to accelerate our way out of the COVID pandemic. We've made election pledges as a Labour Party to put that at the heart of our policies, but there's a growing feeling that our plans aren't ambitious enough. And is there anything that co-ops can do to help keep the focus on this New Deal and the creation of those new jobs? So we've got the Green New Deal. I guess how can, as a movement, we respond to that? But is it enough? Can I bring you in first, Kim? Is that all right?
Yeah, sorry, am I still? Yes. Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think that it's one of those where no matter what we're doing, we can always do more on this agenda. But we also have to be able to deliver it, and we've got to have a solid plan for delivering it. And I think that that's what we need to get in place. And I also think that it's a really good point to make that this is about basically all of the economy, all of the organisations, all of the businesses, all of the public sector organisations playing their part in it. And certainly it's something that in areas like this, and in policing and in crime prevention and in community safety and all of that, it's not the obvious thing to think about, but actually we all have to be thinking about it. And in terms of what the co-op can keep doing, it's about those productive deliverable ideas and policies that drive us forward. And certainly that's why I'm a member, and that's what I think that as a movement we need to be pushing.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, I'll try and be as brief as I can. We're on target, even if everybody sticks to the Paris Climate Agreement, we're on target for about 3.1 to 3.2 degrees of global warming, which will hit runaway effects, which is exactly as Billy said, it's going to displace billions of people and cause massive economic damage. And when you've got the IMF and when you've got the governors of the Bank of England, people like that talking about it, you know that it's not just lefties like us. It is a serious issue that everybody's accepted, apart from Donald Trump, but he's gone. So yes, there is the heavyweight engineering aspect of it, like thousands of wind turbines generating clean, plentiful, cheap, affordable. So it tackles fuel poverty, electricity as well. But there's the housing. We've got to stop building houses that are no longer sustainable. So that requires an improved code. One of the things we're trying to do at scale here, and there's lots of planning to be negotiated is using brownfield houses, building modern methods of construction housing, which are timber, which are locking away the carbon inside the buildings. Transport. We need a much better integrated transport system. We have a net zero plan, which is being consulted on at the moment for the Joint Transport Committee for the whole North East. Part of that I want to see is to bring public transport being public again. But that doesn't necessarily mean, under the current legislation, it can't be local authorities doing it. Yes, we can change the legislation in time, but there's a role for cooperative transport. There's a role for community on-demand transport, all of these things which can get support from the local authority without breaking any state aid rules. So there's approaches there we can do directly as cooperators. We have our citizens assembly bringing people in to solve it, because I'm a firm believer that you've got to take it. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, take people with you. And so our citizens assembly is working on things that people can do as individuals, how we can get involved as communities. But ultimately it requires massive structural change. You have no choice when you turn your tap on who you buy your water from. You have no real choice when you get on a train and go to London, who you're going to go with. We have to change these structural things to be net zero, ideally negative zero where possible, locking away carbon. And we've got a regional plan pulling everybody together on that. So I think it is, you know, I think one of the best things that you could do as individuals is read a book, get some knowledge on it, and then talk about it. So it doesn't matter whether it's, what have we got? We've got
quite a collection there, Jamie.
Economics by Kate Rayworth. That's brilliant. We've got Our Final Warning by Mark Linus. Any of this, you'll find, you know, don't go on Amazon, go to a proper bookshop, but you can find them and educate yourself and be an advocate for it.
Thank you. I've got up next, we've got a whole variety of questions coming in, and they're great, and they're covering all sorts of aspects, but this one's specific to Kim, and it's about obviously Brexit and that the negotiations, particularly regarding law and order, and I guess some of those concerns about the lack of progress in those negotiations and how it affects sort of international information. And I've got a question about, is there any way that, she asked the Co-operative Party, but I guess the movement can help plug that gap, possibly by working internationally with people on different continents. But a real concern, be interesting to know your views about that, Kim, about what's happening with Brexit and the impact on the work that you do.
Well, it is a massive concern. It is the thing. I feel like Brexit at the moment is the giant cloud looming, and we're also focused on COVID, that none of us, you know, the focus has gone off this thing that is potentially life altering for every individual, but certainly will have a huge impact on the North East and on the North. And in terms of policing, I think a lot of good work has gone into safeguarding us from a criminal justice standpoint between forces, cross borders and so on. However, there are inevitable concerns around things like forensic information, international arrest warrants, and, you know, all of those operational things that the force have to deal with on an almost daily basis, because of course what we know is that the crime these days is so much more cross-border. It isn't all about, you know, that localized crime, localized antisocial behavior, all that stuff's still there, but major organized crime cross borders, major organized crime, digital crime and so on, which needs to be investigated not just across Europe but across the rest of the world, it is so important. And I think that being able to just do things in the way that we can whilst we're in the EU, and while we are still on those EU terms, will disappear for policing. And it's something that we really need to be mindful of. I think in terms of what we can do, we are making, as police and crime commissioners, and there are sections of MPs, Labour MPs, it won't surprise you to know, making a lot of noise about this, because it's very important, and we'll keep doing that and keep trying to get it on the agenda. But I think that, again, it is an awareness raising thing, it's a lobbying thing, it's something that it could be genuinely a real problem for us. in particular tackling serious and organised cross-border crime.
No, thank you. A really important issue. So thank you, Mary, for raising that. Kind of linked to that, and I'll ask both of you because I'll be interested in it from both perspectives. Obviously, you know, the Co-op Party has been campaigning against modern slavery, and we've had the Charter against tackling modern slavery as well. And an interesting question about, I guess, what's happening with modern slavery, whether it's more difficult to tackle during lockdown, whether there are different challenges, and also, I guess, how tackling modern slavery links to your procurement as well, and things like the Good Work Pledge. But I'll come to you first, Kim, around modern slavery and I guess some of the challenges with that at the moment.
So very much on the agenda, and there's some really good local and national work going on this, but it is absolutely something that is, and it hasn't had as much airtime. You know, I talked about very early on in the conversation, I mentioned the work that we do on domestic abuse, and one of the major concerns that we had during the pandemic, and particularly during lockdown, was the hidden and insidious nature of a domestic abuse, and the fact that it would probably become more prevalent but less reported. Modern slavery is similar. It flies under the radar. It is by its very nature hidden. It is often exposed by, sometimes exposed by chance, by people being able to present themselves in settings which they wouldn't be able to do during lockdown, and by investigations which take a very long time and an awful lot of work. And these are everything from very low level to very serious and organised crime. At every level. And I think, you know, even when we start to delve into things like county lines, you know, that there are huge aspects of modern slavery involved in those issues, and so they are more difficult to tackle during the pandemic. What I would say is that those things in crisis, these are the things that are highlighted as issues, and they are highlighted as issues in times of crisis like COVID, but what we need to be doing is keeping them on the agenda all the time. You know, and so I'll be signing, hopefully one of the first, Jamie, I'll be signing the Good Work Pledge. And one of the things that we'll be looking at is all of those practices around modern slavery. I don't think it's anything that we're not doing already, but we have to encourage and take the lead and say that this is something that we tackle day in, day out. We stand against day in, day out, whether it's more difficult because of a pandemic or whether it's just bloody difficult because it is.
Mm. Yeah. You're right, it is. So there's, I mean, modern slavery, we have a policy on it. It's part of our procurement, it's part of the Good Work Pledge, it's in there. And to perhaps expand on the health analogy that Kim uses on crime, there's two aspects to it. There's one is the investigation, the finding that's stopping it out. The other is stopping the conditions which make this there. If you have better work, if you have better employment, if you have more transparency of employment, then it does help with these things. So that's you know, stopping the conditions in which it thrives. So we are very proud of what we've done in the North of Tyne, led the way, you know, real living wage employment. We also actually have a gender pay gap of 0, which I'm really proud to have hit in the first year. You know, that's like a real gold standard. And it is difficult, and it does require, you know, we all know that austerity has blighted most of the public enforcement agencies and investigation agencies that we had. So we're all scrabbling around trying to find ways to do things like the Good Work Pledge, which we shouldn't need to do in the first place, but we do, so we're doing it.
No, that's great, and really interesting linking those aspects together. I guess just in summary, I'm going to ask both of you for sort of your final thoughts, if that's all right. We've covered quite a lot of topics there, very diverse range. But coming back to that, I guess that the title of this call, Time to Invest in the North, I guess the answer is yes, but what next is really the question. So if you just want to leave us with some parting thoughts before I close the call and thank everybody. And Jamie, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks. And I've been hammering this away at select committees, at government ministers, at secretaries, the lot. I'm on a call in later this afternoon with people like Jim O'Neill, former Northern Powerhouse Minister, who stopped working with the Tories because he said they weren't serious about levelling up the North. it's never going to happen in a meaningful sense with the tools we've got. You know, we've got people like me and Kim and our local authority leaders beavering away here, but we've got teaspoons when we need mechanical diggers. So there's three major things I've pitched for. One is a regional wealth fund. This is the power to borrow at base rate. We can do that. We can invest heavily in our economy. There's land value uplift capture, so that when, as the state, we invest in, say, a new rail line, the land values shoot up. It creates genuine wealth. But at the moment, developers get that. So I want the power that we can capture that money, which means we can fund these things in the first place. And the long-term investors save, which ties in very much with Kim's agenda. But we know that things like obesity, ill health, all of these things cost a fortune. Far better to invest up front to save them, get the money back. That's one of the best ways we level up. So that's the stuff that I'm proposing. We're hoping for a wider regional Devo to base it on that zero carbon, zero poverty, and get these elements in there. We'll see. It's a Tory government I'm still dealing with.
True, and they're not getting much things right at the moment. Over to you, Kim.
Yeah, they aren't sharing themselves in glory, and I think that this issue around the north-south divide and how we are being underserved as the north is actually much more on people's agenda than it's ever been before, because for the simple fact that people are really feeling it now. And that should never be the case. People should not feel poorer because they live in a different part of the country. I love this place, right? And anyone who ever hears me speak at anything, there's always a sort of a sentimental, I love the region, I love this place. It's because it's so true, I love it. I would never want to live anywhere else. But I say that, and I think our people are like no other. I think we have innovation like nowhere else. I think we think differently. I would think that I'm from here, I'm biased, but the point is that I think that we are very, very lucky with what we have. But I also think that we are really ill-served by a very southern-centric government who continue to invest in areas that suit them rather than areas that make sense. And so for me, what next is that we do need to have more localized control over how we manage those services, and we need the financial backing to do it. So rather than looking at everything in isolation, like looking at police funding, you will hear me as Police and Crime Commissioner lobbying for local government funding and youth funding and funding in other areas, and then control to be able to spend it locally to make the difference, not just in our local authority areas or in our mayoral area or in our Northumbria area, but actually at real neighbourhood area that impacts on people's lives and helps them to improve it. And that's when we'll start to see that's when we'll start to level up, is when we have that control to be able to improve people's lives so that they're no longer in poverty, they're no longer negatively impacted because they live in the north, they no longer have lower life expectancy, lower earning potential, and the list goes on. That's what we need to address, and that's what we need to address together.
Brilliant. And on that note, there is nothing else to add to that apart from thank you for everybody who's joined our lunchtime call. Really appreciate that, and a special thank you to our speakers who have been brilliant. Some really inspiring and interesting thoughts on this agenda. So Kim McGuinness, the Northumbria Police and Crime Commissioner, and Jamie Driscoll, Mayor of the North of Tyne. Thank you very much, and I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep an eye on live.